Talk to me a little bit more about Oralee Smith.
Okay. So, most people for years since I started my nonprofit never asked me about Oralee Smith. And I was getting prepared for my acceptance speech when BET wanted to honor me 2 years ago for being a breast cancer advocate. And one of our volunteers, her name is Yvette, she was helping me with my speech. And she said, you never talk about Oralee and who she was. You got to start telling her story. And she's like, you always go into detail about your uncle and how he lost 150 pounds and all of his hair and all of his eyelashes and his experience in horror with chemo and radiation. And all you say about her is that she said that she would rather die than experience the side effects of chemo and radiation. And I boo-hooed and cried because I didn't realize until that moment that I hadn't been telling her story because it was painful. And part of my therapy, because I do believe in therapy, I do believe that mental health is just as important as physical and emotional and financial health. Um, but one of my therapists suggested that grieving happens in different ways, and sometimes it's easier to grieve when you do something in your loved one's honor. So, naming my nonprofit after Oralee Smith, who raised me, my aunt who raised me, it was my way to honor her memory, honor her legacy. Um, and it was part of my therapy. And there was this article in Essence, they interviewed me, and it was all about turning tragedy into triumph, and how do you heal when you go through something this devastating. And my faith has been a huge part of that, and honoring her memory has been a huge part of that. But her story is actually very profound. It really is the ordinary black grandmama story. She was born in 1932. She had a third grade education. Which what I'm finding is back then, a third grade education was really the equivalent of a PhD. And they had everybody in one classroom in a schoolhouse, and they had an outhouse, and she picked cotton. And her beginnings were so humble. But she had spiritual intuition, spiritual gifts, and she had what she called mother wit. And this mother wit is this concept. A lot of young people don't even know what it is, but it's this knowingness of how to do things and how to make things happen. So she ended up um, being a mother of eight, owning a restaurant successfully, had some health issues, and her restaurant closed while she was in the hospital, unfortunately. And my uncle was her second husband. But she, in her later years, was the glue that held our family together. She was our matriarch in the family. She was the cooker of Christmas and Thanksgiving dinner. She was a church going, praying woman of God. She fed people in the neighborhood. You could not come in her house and leave hungry. She would make sure, baby, you okay? You need something to eat? Sit down. Let me fix you a plate. And everybody, who knew her loved her. And the people in the neighborhood, when they talk about her, they say, oh, Miss Smith, you can always go get food at her house. And even if it was just a popsicle out the back door because she didn't want you letting all the air out in the summertime,
Mhm.
she took care of people, right?
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
and her humility centered me in beauty is as beauty does. And how are you, um, your character mattered. And she taught me to pray for people when they've lost their way instead of judging them, and to help people out when they're having a hard way. And baby, sometimes people can't, they just can't help themselves. And,
Right.
and her heart was of service. Even though she never got an award or never had anything named after her, she poured so much into her family and she sacrificed herself for her family and she loved everybody. And my brother, the one who used to bully me, he would say, "Oh, I bet you I can make her mad." he
Just
was
like
he
your
was
brother.
he was so mischievous, and he would do stuff, and we would see her lose it, and yell at him. It's just like, "What you stop?" But the part that made that funny is if you can imagine, 99.9% of the time, she's this sweet lady who
Right.
never gets mad at anybody. But my brother would bring it out to get a laugh.
Right.
And so, but she was a good person who, I will say, experienced the challenges of being a Black woman, being a Black person in America, who struggled, who overcame obstacles, who wasn't afforded opportunities, and created her path. And she actually cleaned houses for a living after she lost her restaurant. And what she said to me was, "You need to have a way to earn an honest living. And it doesn't matter how much money you make, but do it honestly." And her value system was priceless because it was all about your character, your morals,
Yeah.
and having God be pleased with what you're doing on the planet and how you're living. And oh, I remember, I'll tell you this. So when I started learning history, I started questioning some of the things that I was taught. So I came in one day and I said, "Auntie, why you got this picture of white Jesus up?" Ooh. And I'm like, "Jesus was Black." Oh, she said, "This Jesus was good enough for me, good enough for your mama, good enough for your grandmama, and now you're trying to tell me that this Jesus ain't good enough for you." I said, "It's the same Jesus, but why you gotta be painted white? Jesus
Mhm.
don't have a color. He look white with blonde hair and blue eyes in his picture."
Right.
And so
Right.
I know there were times where I gave her a headache about stuff like that. But I
Mhm.
always asked those kind of questions growing up. And even when I was younger, I would ask a million questions. And she got a set of encyclopedias from the white people whose house she cleaned. And she gave me the set of encyclopedias so I could stop asking her a million questions.
There
But
you
she was,
go.
yeah, she was resourceful. And I know those things help shape my journey. And I'm grateful that she sacrificed for my brothers and I. Um,
Right.
and the reason why it was important when when I was her caregiver and watching what she experienced with cancer in her last 3 months of her life, and then with my uncle, why I named my foundation after her was because too seldomly do regular Black women become a champion for just being amazing as women, as mothers, as wives, as members of the community, and serving in church. And I said, if we can have a Susan G, we can have an Aura Lee. And why is Susan G. Coleman so special? And and I'm like, I don't even know anything about her. But if we can have a Susan G, why can't we have an Orly?
Right.
And I'm actually really inspired by the founder of Susan G. Komen because she named this foundation after her sister
Mhm.
who passed from cancer. And so I said, well, I can name a foundation after my aunt who passed from cancer. And
Mhm.
this is, I think it's important to have everyday Black heroes and to celebrate the matriarchs of our family who have these thankless jobs of making sure that we eat every day and we have clothes. And she didn't care about name brands, but she made sure that we were clean and decent every day.
Right. Right.
I'm thankful to her because I never went hungry. I never knew. not having electricity, and we weren't rich by any stretch of the imagination, but she
Right.
made sure that she stretched. So if we didn't have a lot, she made a bag of beans and cornbread, and she taught me how to cook. So
Mhm.
I think I'm one of the only people I know under 40 that can still make cornbread from scratch and a pot of pinto beans straight from the dry beans, not the can. We did
That's
not grow
pretty
up
good.
with microwaves or cable. Um, I didn't know what Jiffy was until I was almost 20 years old.
Right.
And so
Right.
I could make cakes from scratch, and I pick collard greens. I have vivid memories of picking collards, spinach,
Wow.
turnips, uh, mustards.
Mhm. Right.
We have this big old bag
Right.
of greens. So like if we
Right.
went down to this little bitty pot, like we worked all day with this little pot.
Right. Exactly.
I remember when she
Right.
would have me go over, she was like, you gotta make sure there's no grit and get
Mhm.
clean the greens
Mhm.
right. and,
Right.
and so she she had high standards,
Mhm.
and and her integrity, her character are what I love. And we pulled the people who helped me with the brand design, they pulled in what I'm doing and my character with her character. And that became the foundation of our organization.